You built a wall, but you forgot the back door. You've done the heavy lifting. You've reorganized your life, changed the locks, and established a perimeter of silence. You have walked away from a situation that felt like treading water in a heavy current. But inside that fortress of self-protection, there is a draft. It is a quiet, persistent chill that comes from a single, unlatched window you don't even realize is open. We call this window the search for closure. In the delicate, high-tension machinery of complicated relationships, closure isn't a resolution. It is often the very mechanism used to pull you back into the orbit of a person who thrives on your attention. But why is our very search for peace the thing that often destroys it? The no-contact paradox is an equilibrium problem. In theory, silence is the ultimate boundary. In practice, however, many treat it like a temporary fast rather than a permanent shift in gravity. We hold our breath, counting the days, hoping our absence will finally act as a mirror, forcing the other person to recognize the weight of what they've lost. But here is the subtle misalignment. You are using silence to heal, while they may perceive that same silence as a challenge to their ego, a puzzle to be solved or a control to be regained. What happens when your desire for a final, respectful word meets their refusal to let the conversation ever truly end? We are a species that craves symmetry. Psychologists often speak of the Zeigarnik effect, the tendency of the human brain to remember uncompleted tasks better than completed ones. When a relationship ends in a wreckage of ambiguity, our minds go into a state of high alert. We become investigators of our own trauma, obsessively searching for the missing piece of the puzzle that will make the pain feel logical. This instinct is deeply human, but in this specific context, it is a liability. It creates a magnetic pull toward the very person who is incapable of giving you the answers you seek. The problem is, the person who caused the confusion is the last person who can provide the clarity. They aren't monsters, they are echoes of an internal scarcity. It is easy to paint an ex-partner as a villain, but the reality is often more mundane and more tragic. Many who exhibit these high conflict traits operate from a place of profound internal fragility. Their sense of self is like a sieve. It requires constant external validation just to feel substantial. They don't necessarily set out to destroy you. They simply need to know that they still have the power to elicit a response. To them, your curiosity, even your anger, is a signal that the tether hasn't been cut, only stretched. How do they know exactly when your resolve is beginning to fray? An emotional response is a form of tribute. Think of your emotional energy as a finite currency. When you engage, even if that engagement is a sharp "leave me alone," you have inadvertently paid a tax. You have signaled that this person still occupies a prime plot of land in your mental landscape. For someone whose ego is a leaky bucket, that drop of attention is everything. It confirms their relevance. It tells them the door is ajar. But wait, is there a deeper reason why one simple text message can undo months of disciplined progress? The just one text fallacy is a structural test. It usually starts with something trivial, something that feels grounded in logistics or polite society. A question about a stray item of clothing, a shared password, or a neutral happy birthday. It feels harmless. It feels like the mature thing to do. However, this is rarely about the logistics. It is a probe, a way to test the structural integrity of your new life. If the boundary yields even an inch, the psychological pressure on the other side begins to build. In reality, you aren't being polite. You are negotiating with a situation that doesn't recognize the rules of negotiation. We mistake a performance for a metamorphosis. At some point, the silence might be broken by a version of this person you've never seen before. They are suddenly overflowing with insight. They speak about their new therapist, their recent epiphanies, and a profound poetic regret. It's an elegant display, but we must ask ourselves, is this a genuine change of character, or is it a tactical adjustment? Often, the ego will adopt any mask, even the mask of the humble penitent, if it means regaining access to its favorite source of validation. Why does the brain prioritize the potential of a person over the consistent reality of their actions? The chemistry of the trauma bond is heavy and silent. It isn't just a matter of willpower, it's a matter of biology. When a relationship fluctuates between intense affection and sudden withdrawal, it creates a neurological loop similar to a gambling addiction. You aren't necessarily missing the person, you are missing the chemical relief that comes when the tension finally breaks. This intermittent reinforcement creates a psychological fog where the bad times are dismissed as anomalies and the good times are treated as the ultimate truth. In fact, this cycle makes the moments of peace feel far more valuable than they actually are. Grand gestures are often just loud static. A handwritten letter or a public declaration of change can feel like the breakthrough you've been waiting for. But character is built in the quiet, boring, consistent moments, not in the theatrical ones. These grand gestures are often attempts to bypass the slow, difficult work of actual accountability. They are designed to trigger your hope, because hope is the most effective tool for lowering a person's defenses. The problem is, we want to believe the apology because it's the easiest way to stop the hurting. Hope can be a form of self-sabotage. When we cling to the idea that this time will be different, we aren't just being optimistic, we are being protective. We are protecting the version of the future we invested months or years into building. But as the gray fog of the relationship begins to lift, a more uncomfortable truth emerges. The error isn't in how you left, but in your belief that you need their permission to finally stay gone. This leads us to a realization that changes the entire landscape of your recovery. The performance of change is a fragile architecture. When a person who has spent years perfecting a specific pattern of behavior suddenly presents a new and improved self, we are witnessing a phenomenon of psychological adaptation. This isn't necessarily a sinister plot. It is often a desperate attempt by a fragile ego to re-establish its equilibrium. To them, losing your attention feels like a depletion of air. They don't change because they have suddenly developed a profound sense of moral clarity. They change because the old methods stopped working. The tragedy of this performance is its temporary nature. It is a house built on sand, designed to weather a storm but not to be a permanent residence. But what happens when the theater of remorse begins to feel indistinguishable from reality? The core issues aren't erased, they are merely repackaged. True internal shifts require a grueling, often quiet process of self-reckoning. However, in these high-tension dynamics, change is often loud, visible, and urgent. It is a frantic adjustment of the mask. The deep-seated inability to view others as independent individuals with their own needs, rather than just extensions of their own ego, usually remains intact. They haven't found a new way to love, they've simply found a more sophisticated way to be heard. This realization leads to an uncomfortable question. Why do we allow ourselves to be convinced by the performance? The error isn't in the response, it is in the why that drives it. Most of us are conditioned by a social contract that values politeness, second chances, and the higher road. We are taught that if someone says they've changed, the compassionate response is to believe them. We become our own unwitting saboteurs because we apply healthy relationship logic to an unhealthy relationship vacuum. We respond not because we believe them, but because our own internal moral code makes us feel guilty for the coldness of silence. But there is an even deeper internal conflict at play, one that feels like a quiet, structural failure of the mind. You are navigating a psychological civil war. This state of being, often described as cognitive dissonance, is a profound and heavy tension where two irreconcilable truths occupy the same space. Your logic knows the history, the moments of indifference, the subtle dismissals, the weight of the silence. But your heart, trained by years of hope, clings to the potential version of that person. It is like trying to navigate by two different compasses, each pointing in an opposite direction. The result isn't just confusion, it's a form of cognitive vertigo. How do we cope with the sheer exhaustion of this internal divide? The brain begins to edit its own history to find relief. To stop the pain of this dissonance, the mind often chooses the path of least resistance. It begins to minimize the heavy memories and amplify the lighter ones. You find yourself focusing on the 3 hours of laughter rather than the 3 weeks of anxiety. You start to frame their cruelty as stress or their indifference as distraction. This isn't weakness, it's a survival mechanism designed to bring your internal world back into balance, even if that balance is based on a lie. But when you stop believing your own eyes, what happens to your sense of self? The erosion of self-trust is a quiet, cumulative process. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens in the small moments where you choose their reality over your own. You ask yourself, was it really that bad? Or maybe I'm being too sensitive. By constantly recalibrating your boundaries to accommodate their instability, you lose your internal North Star. You become a passenger in your own life, waiting for the other person's mood to determine the weather of your day. This leads to a specific, almost philosophical trap that keeps you tethered to the past. We are demanding accountability from a bank that is insolvent. There is a profound human desire to be seen and understood, especially by the person who hurt us. We stay in the conversation because we want them to finally say, I see the pain I caused. But for a person who views life through the lens of their own scarcity, admitting fault feels like total ego annihilation. They cannot give you closure because they cannot afford the cost of the truth. When you realize this, you stop asking for an apology and start asking why you still need one. But even with this intellectual clarity, the most subtle trap of all is still waiting for its moment. The most dangerous tool in their arsenal isn't their anger, it's your empathy. Most people who find themselves in these patterns possess a high degree of compassion. You are the person who sees the brokenness beneath the bravado. You are the one who wants to help, to heal, and to understand. And this is exactly what a high-conflict ego will use as a point of entry. They don't need to break down your door if they can convince you to open it out of a sense of duty or pity. But how does a person turn your best qualities into a mechanism for your own undoing? They don't fear your kindness, they rely on its predictability. They understand that your empathy is a predictable reflex. They know which buttons to push to trigger your nurturing side, your sense of guilt, or your desire for justice. In the gray, heavy atmosphere of these final stages, the conversation shifts. They aren't the aggressor anymore. They are the wounded, the misunderstood, the one who just needs one last chance to explain. And this is where the quiet intensity of the trap becomes truly weightless, making it almost impossible to feel until it's already snapped shut. They don't fear your empathy, they view it as a predictable utility. It is a common mistake to view a high-conflict individual as a predator who hates kindness. In reality, they often find your compassion quite useful. It is the bridge they use to cross back into your life when the terrain of their own ego becomes too barren to survive alone. They don't see your empathy as a virtue to be honored, but as a structural weakness, a back door you've left unlocked because your own moral code forbids you from being cold. While you are busy trying to be fair, They are busy occupying the space you've worked so hard to clear. But how does a person transform your own integrity into a tool for your own undoing? The victim pivot is an act of psychological survival. When the old methods of control fail, a fragile ego will often instinctively adopt the posture of the wounded. They aren't necessarily lying in the traditional sense. In their own distorted internal narrative, they truly feel like the victim of your new boundaries. They present a crisis, a sudden onset of loneliness, or a tragic realization of their past mistakes. This isn't a request for help, it is a test of your resolve. They are checking to see if the compassion they've come to rely on is still available for harvest. And here is where the most nuanced danger lies: the belief that your understanding can save them. Compassion for someone who refuses to be accountable is a form of self-erasure. When you lean into their victim narrative, you begin to bargain with your own peace. You think, if I can just show them one more act of grace, they might finally achieve the clarity I've been waiting for. But the person on the other side isn't looking for clarity. They are looking for a return to the status quo. They don't want a connection that requires mutual growth. They want a theater where they are the lead and you are the supporting cast. This brings us to the quiet threshold of recognition, the moment where the mechanics of the trap become visible. The most common error isn't the act of responding, it is the act of explaining. We are socialized to believe that if we can just find the right words, the right tone, or the right metaphor, we can bridge the gap of understanding. We want them to see the bruises they left on our psyche. We seek closure through a final, logical dialogue. But in a relationship defined by an imbalance of ego, your explanation isn't heard as a boundary. It is heard as an invitation. But why does your most logical defense always end up feeding the conflict? To a person seeking validation, your explanation is nothing but supply. When you explain your why, you are essentially giving them a map of your internal world. You are confirming that their presence still has the power to make you defend yourself. They don't listen to your words to find common ground, they listen to find the next handle. Every because you offer is another piece of yourself you are handing over to someone who has no intention of guarding it. It is a cycle that can only be broken when you change the objective. True closure is a private, unshared act of the will. The search for a mutual ending is a ghost story we tell ourselves to avoid the loneliness of the exit. You will likely never receive a sincere, unconditioned apology. You will never have that final, cinematic conversation where the other person finally gets it. Real closure happens in the quiet space of your own mind. The moment you accept that their inability to understand you is not a failure of your communication, but a limitation of their own capacity. But wait, there is one final shift in perspective that changes everything. You aren't losing a companion, you are shedding a weight. The day you stop explaining is the day you truly step out of the current. You don't need them to agree with your reasons for those reasons to be valid. You don't need them to sign off on your departure for the door to be locked. You are finished the moment their perception of your character no longer feels like a debt you have to pay. The masterpiece standard. Your healing is not a collaborative project. It is a solo reclaiming of the ground you once thought was shared, but was always yours to keep. Did the air feel a bit lighter as you read this? If these observations helped you see the architecture of your own boundaries more clearly, I invite you to share that moment of recognition in the comments. Your perspective might be the very thing that helps someone else stop explaining and start breathing. Don't let the draft back in. If you found value in this quiet intensity, consider staying with us. Subscribe and hit the notification bell to keep your perimeter secure. Your peace is the only thing that is truly non-negotiable. We'll speak again soon.